5 disturbing true blackout horror stories that will haunt you in the dark. Preface. Imagine waking up in total darkness, where every sound is magnified, every shadow feels alive, and every breath you take reminds you that something else might be breathing with you. Tonight, we'll explore 5 horrifying tales where blackouts became the gateway to unspeakable terror. Are you ready to face the darkness? Story 1. Shadows in the Substation. I never considered myself afraid of the dark. Not until that night. I worked as an electrician in a small town where most emergencies boiled down to fixing frayed wires or replacing blown transformers. Blackouts were rare, and when they happened, they were usually resolved quickly. That's why I wasn't too concerned when my supervisor called me after hours to check the old substation on the edge of town. "Routine," he said. "Shouldn't take more than an hour." The substation was an eyesore, a hulking, decrepit building left over from the 1920s. Locals avoided it, and not just because of the peeling paint and rusted gates. Stories swirled around it, whispers of strange noises, flickering lights, and the occasional disappearance of stray animals, or worse. I never believed any of it. Until that night. The drive out there felt unusually long. The blackout had plunged the entire area into darkness, and even with my truck's headlights slicing through the gloom, the world felt eerily still. By the time I pulled up to the substation, an uneasy weight had settled on my chest. The building loomed like a shadow, its windows dark and lifeless. A cold wind whipped around me as I stepped out, carrying with it the scent of metal and damp earth. I grabbed my toolkit and flashlight, steeling myself as I approached the heavy steel door. It groaned loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a warning. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the smell of oil and decay. My flashlight beam swept over peeling walls and broken machinery, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of settling metal. Something about the place felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I chalked it up to my imagination and made my way to the control room. The panel was old but functional, or so I thought. As I began inspecting the circuits, a strange smell hit me. It wasn't just the usual mildew or rat droppings, it was sharp, rancid, like something long dead. Then came the sound. At first, it was faint, like the tap-tap-tap of fingernails on glass. It seemed to come from deep within the walls, distant yet deliberate. I paused, holding my breath as I strained to listen. The tapping stopped. I shook my head, forcing a laugh. "Rats," I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded hollow in the stillness. I returned to the panel, determined to finish quickly. But as I worked, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely, plunging the room into pitch black. My flashlight was the only thing standing between me and total darkness. I twisted the beam toward the panel, but the light felt feeble, as though the shadows were pressing against it, trying to snuff it out. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by the failing flashlight. But shadows don't move like that. They don't slither along the walls, twisting and stretching as though alive. My stomach turned as the shape coalesced into something almost human, a tall, impossibly thin figure that seemed to ripple and distort, its edges fraying like smoke. My breath caught in my throat. It had no face, just an empty void where eyes and a mouth should have been. Yet I felt it staring at me, its gaze heavy and suffocating. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The figure moved closer, its motions jerky and unnatural, like a puppet dragged on invisible strings. My flashlight flickered, its beam sputtering as the shadow reached out, long, spindly arms stretching toward me. "Stay back!" I yelled, though my voice wavered with fear. It didn't listen. The air around me grew colder, each breath turning to mist. The tapping noise returned, louder this time, joined by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, mocking, cruel, hungry. I turned and ran, my boots echoing on the metal grating as I sprinted toward the exit. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more frantic. Behind me, I could hear the screech of metal, as though something massive was dragging itself through the halls. The door was just ahead. I lunged for it only to find it locked. My heart sank. I hadn't locked it. My hands fumbled with the handle, slick with sweat as panic clawed at my chest. A cold breath brushed against the back of my neck. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, my flashlight trembling in my hand. It was right behind me. The figure loomed, its featureless face inches from mine. For a moment, everything was silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then it reached out, its fingers brushing against my arm. Pain shot through me, a searing, icy agony that burned and froze all at once. I screamed, jerking away as the flashlight slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The lights flickered back on, flooding the room with harsh, artificial brightness. The whispers ceased. The shadow was gone. The door swung open easily under my trembling hand, and I stumbled out into the night, gasping for air. I didn't stop running until I was back in my truck, slamming the door and locking it tight. The next morning, my supervisor laughed off my story, dismissing it as stress and overwork. But I know what I saw. And now, every time the power flickers in my house, I feel it again, that suffocating presence lurking just beyond the edge of the light, watching, waiting. Story 2. The Endless Apartment. They say the dark makes you see things that aren't there, but what if it shows you things that are? It was a warm summer evening when the blackout hit my building. I lived on the 14th floor of a towering concrete monstrosity that had long since lost its charm. The elevator was ancient and unreliable, so I always took the stairs. Good for my legs, bad for my patience. That night, I was climbing up the dimly lit stairwell after work, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The sudden darkness was disorienting, a smothering void that made it hard to breathe. "Great," I muttered, fishing for my phone. The flashlight app barely cut through the inky black, but it was enough to see the steps in front of me. I kept climbing, the air growing thicker with each flight. When I reached my floor, something felt off. The hallway stretched out longer than it should have, the familiar rows of doors replaced by an endless line of identical featureless apartments. Did I miscount the floors? I whispered to myself, though the thought sent a chill crawling down my spine. I turned to go back, but the stairwell door was gone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped. I started walking, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Each door I passed looked the same, dark wood with a brass number, though the numbers didn't make sense. They weren't sequential, 812, 223, 1407, and some of them were scratched out, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and something faintly metallic, like blood. I reached out to touch one of the doors, but the brass knob was ice cold, sending a sharp jolt through my hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" A faint sound answered, something scraping against the floor, far down the hall. It was slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a heavy object. "Who's there?" I demanded, though my voice lacked any real authority. The scraping stopped. My pulse thundered in my ears as I shone my flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on a figure crouched in the distance, its back to me. It was human-shaped but wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move. I took a step back, my shoes scuffing against the floor. The sound must have alerted it because it slowly turned its head toward me. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a blank, featureless slate of skin. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale flesh stretched tight over bone. I ran. The hallway seemed to stretch infinitely, no matter how far I went. My breaths came in ragged gasps as the sound of scraping returned, closer now, faster. I tried door after door, but they were all locked, the knobs refusing to turn under my frantic hands. My flashlight began to flicker, its beam growing weaker with every passing second. When I turned back to check how close the thing was, it was gone. The silence was worse than the sound. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for air, and pressed my back against the wall. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into suffocating darkness. And then I heard it, whispering. Soft and indistinct, like a dozen voices murmuring at once. They seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air around me. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, sharper, until they formed a single chilling word: open. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the nearest doorknob. I tried to stop myself, but my body refused to obey. The door creaked open, revealing an apartment bathed in pale, flickering light. The living room was wrong. The furniture was twisted and distorted, the angles impossible. The walls pulsed as if alive, their surfaces slick with something dark and glistening. In the center of the room stood a figure, its back to me. At first I thought it was human, but as it turned, I realized it wasn't. Its head was split down the middle, revealing rows of jagged, glistening teeth. Its limbs twitched unnaturally, as if struggling to hold their shape. It smiled, or something close to a smile. "You're late," it said, its voice a guttural rasp that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and collapsing against the wall. The whispers were deafening now, chanting in unison, though I couldn't make out the words. I ran again, not caring where I went, just desperate to escape. The hallway finally ended at a single door, plain and unmarked. Without thinking, I threw it open and tumbled through. When I looked up, I was back in the stairwell. The lights flickered once before stabilizing, casting the space in familiar fluorescent light. I bolted for the exit and didn't stop until I was outside, gulping down fresh air. The building looked normal again, its windows glowing warmly with the light of the restored power. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't really escaped, because when I looked down at my hand, the doorknob was still ice cold. Story 3. The Candlelight Visitor. I had always been a light sleeper. The faintest creak of the floorboards or the hum of a distant car was enough to pull me from my dreams. So when the blackout hit, plunging my house into total darkness, I knew it would be a restless night. The storm outside didn't help. Rain lashed against the windows in relentless sheets, and the wind howled like some wounded animal. I had lit a few candles to stave off the darkness, their soft, flickering glow providing the only comfort in an otherwise oppressive night. I was about to call it quits and go to bed when I heard the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the storm. 3 soft raps on the front door. I froze, my heart quickening. It was well past midnight. Who would be out in this weather? For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed the nearest candle and made my way to the door, the shadows dancing wildly across the walls as I moved. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No answer. My hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitation clawing at my chest. Something about the knocks felt wrong, too deliberate, too rhythmic, like they weren't meant to be a request but a signal. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. The porch was empty. The rain poured in sheets, turning the world beyond into a blurry haze. There were no footprints on the wet wood, no sign that anyone had been there. I stepped back inside, shutting the door firmly and locking it. "Just the wind," I muttered, trying to convince myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I turned back to the living room, I saw it. A figure stood in the corner, just beyond the reach of the candlelight. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long and thin. Its head tilted slightly, as though studying me. I gasped, nearly dropping the candle. What are you?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. It didn't respond. The figure stepped closer and I noticed its eyes, or the lack thereof. Two dark, empty sockets stared back at me, and yet I felt its gaze pierce through me, cold and unrelenting. Its skin was ashen, stretched tight over sharp bones, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth, was a jagged, toothless maw that seemed to twist into a grotesque grin. "Leave!" I managed to choke out, backing away. The figure stopped, its head tilting further. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice but a whisper that echoed inside my skull, it said, "You invited me." My mind raced. I hadn't opened the door for anyone. The candles flickered violently, their flames shrinking and stretching as if caught in an invisible wind. The figure moved again, gliding rather than walking, its feet never touching the ground. "Who are you?" I demanded, though the words felt hollow. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised one long bony finger and pointed to the candle in my hand. The flame sputtered, shrinking to a faint ember before extinguishing completely. The darkness was suffocating. Panic set in as I stumbled backward, my hands grasping for anything solid. The room felt unfamiliar, the walls too far apart, the air too thick. "You welcomed the dark," the voice whispered, wrapping around me like smoke. "And the dark always answers," I screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive black. Something cold and clammy brushed against my arm, sending a jolt of terror through me. I swung wildly, but my hands met only empty air. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and chaotic, filling my ears until I thought my head might split open. Then just as suddenly, they stopped. The candles reignited, their flames steady and unwavering. The figure was gone. I stood there trembling, clutching the edge of the table for support. The house was silent again, save for the storm outside. But as I turned to make my way upstairs, I saw it. On the wall, scrawled in ash, were 3 words: "Don't look back." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Against every instinct, I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was there, standing right behind me, its eyeless sockets inches from my face. The candles went out again, plunging me into a darkness I feared I'd never escape. Story 4. The Basement Below. They say you never truly know a house until you've lived in it through a storm. I moved into my grandmother's old house a few weeks ago, a creaky 2-story relic with a history as murky as the waters of the nearby marshes. It was meant to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That night, the storm rolled in fast, carrying thunder that shook the windows and lightning that turned the sky into a strobe light. By the time the power cut out, the house was a maze of shadows, the faint glow of my flashlight the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. I was rummaging through the kitchen drawers for candles when I heard it, a low, rhythmic thudding coming from below. The basement. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The house had always been quiet before, the kind of silence that felt thick and heavy like it was hiding something. But now it was alive, the sound echoing up through the floorboards like a heartbeat. Probably just the old pipes, I whispered to myself, though my voice shook with doubt. The thudding grew louder, more insistent, as if daring me to investigate. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the basement door. The handle was cold, almost wet, and the hinges groaned in protest as I opened it. A wave of damp, musty air hit me, carrying the faint scent of earth and something sour. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, the beam cutting through the thick darkness to reveal a narrow wooden staircase leading into the abyss. "Just check it out and get back upstairs," I muttered, as much a command as a prayer. The steps creaked under my weight, each one sounding like a scream in the suffocating silence. At the bottom, the air was colder, heavier, wrapping around me like a damp shroud. The basement was larger than I remembered, the walls lined with shelves of old jars and tools that hadn't been touched in decades. But what caught my attention was the far corner. Something was there. At first I thought it was a pile of debris, maybe old furniture or a stack of forgotten boxes. But as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't. It was an old wooden door, partially obscured by cobwebs and dirt. It wasn't there before. The thudding came again, louder now, and unmistakably coming from behind that door. My flashlight flickered, the shadows around me deepening. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. No response. I approached the door, my every nerve screaming for me to turn back. The wood was ancient, its surface splintered and warped, the iron handle crusted with rust. Against all reason, I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a passageway that shouldn't have been there. The air inside was colder still, carrying a faint metallic tang that set my teeth on edge. "Grandma never mentioned this," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. The flashlight barely illuminated the narrow corridor beyond, its walls rough and uneven, carved directly into the earth. The thudding was louder now, almost deafening, each beat reverberating through the walls like a drum. Something moved in the darkness ahead. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The beam of my flashlight landed on a figure at the end of the corridor, hunched and still. It was impossible to make out any details, but it was there, unmistakably human-shaped. "Hey!" I called, though I immediately regretted it. The figure jerked, its movements sharp and unnatural, as if it were being pulled by invisible strings. Slowly it turned to face me. Its face, or what was left of it, was a mask of decay, the flesh rotting away to reveal jagged bone and empty sockets that oozed something black and viscous. Its jaw hung open, unhinged, and from its throat came the source of the thudding, a rhythmic guttural noise that sounded like something caught between a scream and a heartbeat. I stumbled back, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The thing took a step toward me, its body lurching forward in jerky, unnatural movements. Behind it, the darkness seemed to shift and writhe as if it were alive, spilling into the corridor like an unstoppable tide. I ran. The corridor seemed to stretch longer with every step, the air growing heavier and colder. The sound of the creature's thudding breaths followed me, growing louder and faster, matching the frantic rhythm of my heartbeat. I burst back into the basement, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, the noise stopped. Then, slowly, the thudding resumed, this time coming from the other side of the door. I bolted up the stairs, not stopping until I was back in the kitchen. My flashlight flickered one last time before dying, plunging me into total darkness. The sound of the storm was gone now, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the world itself had stopped. And then, I heard it. A low, rhythmic thudding, this time coming from the front door. Story 5. Shadows in the Street. The blackout hit just after 8 p.m. I remember because I was in the middle of an online meeting, trying to keep my boss from noticing the cat perched on my laptop. 1 second, my apartment was alive with the soft hum of electronics and the glow of screens. The next, everything went dark. At first I thought it was just my building, but when I stepped out onto the balcony, I saw that the entire street had been swallowed by the same darkness. The air felt different, thicker somehow, and the silence was absolute. No cars, no voices, not even the distant buzz of the city. It was as if the world had been wrapped in cotton, muffling every sound. I told myself it was just a power outage. They happen all the time. But the unease settled in anyway, a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. As I leaned over the balcony, peering into the void below, I saw them. Shadows. At first I thought they were just people, their silhouettes faintly illuminated by the pale glow of the crescent moon. But they didn't move like people. The shapes were fluid, shifting unnaturally, their outlines bleeding into the darkness. They glided along the street in silence, their forms flickering like candle flames caught in the wind. I stepped back from the railing, my pulse quickening. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But then one of them stopped. It turned, or at least it seemed to. There were no eyes, no face, just a void where its head should have been. And yet, I felt its gaze. It was like being seen through, as if the thing could peel back the layers of my thoughts and see the fears buried beneath. I stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the sliding door shut. My hands trembled as I locked it, though I wasn't sure what good a lock would do. The shadows didn't follow, not immediately. But they lingered in the street, their flickering forms multiplying, pooling together like ink spreading across paper. I turned off the flashlight on my phone, afraid that the light might draw them closer. The darkness pressed in around me, and I could swear I heard whispers, faint and fragmented, like the edges of a dream. Then the knocking started. 3 sharp raps at the front door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The door was just a few feet away, separated only by the narrow hallway. The sound came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I crept closer, the floor creaking beneath my bare feet. The peephole was useless in the dark, but I leaned toward it anyway, squinting into the black void beyond. There was nothing there. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint scratching, like nails running down the wood. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn the flashlight back on. When the beam flickered to life, it illuminated something that made my stomach drop. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like ash, were the words, "Turn off the light." The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and then it stopped altogether. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I darted into my bedroom, locking the door behind me and sliding under the bed like a terrified child. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I stared at the faint glow of my phone, counting the seconds, straining to hear anything beyond my shallow breaths. And then, the light from my phone dimmed. Not like the battery dying, it was still at 70%. It was as if something was pulling the light away, draining it. Shadows began to gather on the walls, their forms writhing and stretching. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows converged in the center of the room, pooling together into a shape that was almost human, but too jagged, too wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too sharp, like broken glass twisting in slow motion. "Why me?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking with fear. The shadow tilted its head, its form flickering as it spoke, not with words, but with thoughts pressed into my mind like cold fingers. "You looked." I didn't understand, not at first, but then it hit me. The balcony, the street. I had seen them, and they had seen me. The shadow began to move closer, the darkness around it deepening. I pressed myself further under the bed, my back scraping against the frame. Suddenly, the room plunged into absolute black. Even the faint glow of my phone disappeared, consumed by the entity. I felt it before I saw it, a cold, suffocating presence settling over me like a shroud. And then, a voice. "Run!" The light snapped back on, blinding and searing, and I found myself lying on the floor of my living room. The shadows were gone, the whispers silent, but the words remained, burned into the wall in jagged, blackened letters. "Don't look again." I packed my bags that night and left the city, driving until dawn broke over the horizon. But even now, as I write this from the safety of my sister's house, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone, because every night since I've heard the knocking, for woe. Epilogue. The Blackout Phenomenon. They called it a localized power outage, a glitch in the city's ancient electrical grid. A minor inconvenience, they said, nothing to worry about. But the survivors of that night know better. It wasn't the blackout itself that was terrifying. It was what it revealed. In the weeks following the event, I scoured forums, news articles, even the darkest corners of the internet, searching for answers. What I found was a chilling thread running through countless stories from across the country, even the world. Reports of strange occurrences during blackouts, shadows moving independently, unexplainable noises, doors that led to nowhere, and always the sense of being watched. Each story was different, yet eerily familiar. A man in Tokyo described a shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed during a power outage. A woman in Brazil recounted hearing whispers in her empty house, voices urging her to open a door she didn't recognize. A teenager in Canada swore he saw his reflection blink at him after the lights went out. The details varied, but the warnings were the same. Don't look, don't listen, don't acknowledge them. What's more disturbing is that these incidents seem to follow a pattern. The blackout was just the beginning, a crack in the veil that separates our world from something darker. The entities, whatever they are, use the darkness as a doorway, slipping through when our world is most vulnerable. I tried to forget, to move on, but the memories haunt me. I can still feel the cold presence of the shadow in my room, hear the faint thudding from behind that cursed basement door. And I'm not the only one. The survivors I've spoken to report the same lingering unease, the feeling that something has followed them out of the darkness. For some, it's subtle, a shadow that's a little too long, a faint knock on the window when no one's there. For others, it's more direct. One man claimed he woke up to find the words, "We are watching," scrawled on his ceiling. I don't know what they want or why they chose us. Maybe it's random, or maybe it's something we did, some rule we broke without realizing. But I do know one thing. The blackouts are happening more frequently. I saw the latest news this morning, another unexplained outage, this time in a small town 3 states away. The article dismissed it as a minor technical failure, but the comments told a different story. People are starting to notice the patterns, to connect the dots. And yet, no one seems to know how to stop it. So I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who might be reading. If the lights go out, stay calm. Don't go outside. Don't look into the shadows. And if you hear a knock at your door, whatever you do, don't open it. Because they're out there, waiting. And next time, the lights might not come back on. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion, and I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.